Okay, so today is Thursday, June 22nd. I'm also going to be reading today the readings from June 18th because I did not get a chance to do that. So the readings from June 18th are Mark 16, Romans 2, and Matthew 4. The readings for today are Romans 8 and Matthew 10. So let's do a little bit on the last video. So the last video was about seeing through the disintegration of God as creator to the center of the world. So when God created the world, he had to essentially disintegrate from himself. And that's sort of the nature and creation of what we often identify as evil, but is God's will, to the center of the world, which in a lot of ways is kind of symbolized by Christ. Christ is the Son of Man and the Son of God, and he represents the sacrifice of God. So the plight of Jesus as the Christ is the plight of God in the world, namely his own self-disintegration, which the Christ is in and among, he essentially, of course, represents God under the conditions of finitude. And so the sacrifice of God was sacrificing his infinite nature to enter finitude. And so we think there might be reasons to believe that that sacrifice is good, just because of the nature of God. So let's do the Mark readings. The highlights here: Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, brought spices. So I think this is the tomb. Yeah, so this is after the crucifixion and burial. Two Marys bring spices so that they could anoint like Jesus's body. And they come upon the tomb and says, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the door of the tomb?" And so the stone has already been rolled away, and he is risen, he is not here, says, I think, the angel. So what does this mean psychologically? So the stone is sort of the symbol of the evil, apparently evil disintegration of God. That is kind of the layer that covers over the sacrifice. So we see the sacrifice in a lot of ways as evil because of the developments of evolution, where the idea is we're getting increasingly more like the Son of God and increasingly made in the image of the sacrifice. And so over time, a layer has sort of developed of habits of survival that represent earlier forms of God's disintegration. So we can think of the stone as that layer of evolutionary adaptation that covers, that masks or hides or convinces us that of something other than God's self-sacrificial nature. So the stone is rolled away from the tomb, and the indestructible center, the full embodiment of God's sacrifice, is not there. And so God's sacrifice in creating the world is always going before itself into the future. It's kind of part of the nature of the sacrifice is that it goes before. There's a reason for it. Right. Okay. So the center that one seeks, this is now applying it interpersonally. The center one seeks in others. You want to see in others the way in which God's sacrifice embodied in them goes before them. And so the idea is we should always want to see the image of God as his sacrifice within the human individual. So the human individual is always already embodying the sacrifice of God. And so the way to know people is to know them in the spirit that goes before them, which is the embodiment of God as sacrifice. And so this is the way of conceptualizing people, is they're not just kind of the material manifestations or phenomenological attributes. It's not just the things we see, because many times the things we see in people are those earlier forms of adaptation that we know will be superseded, and so we see them as deficient or wrong or even evil in some way. And so the way to see through that is to see that every human individual is an embodiment of God's own sacrifice, which is always going before itself. So I think we'll say more about what that means. There's a lot of readings today. So in Romans, let's read Romans. The highlighted part, what the law requires is written on their hearts. He's talking about, I think, Jews and Gentiles and the law and grace and all that. God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus. Okay, so this is kind of what we're saying. So this spirit of God's sacrifice in others is the spirit of freedom that is leading and compelling individuals. It's really more of a pull than a push. It's every individual has this potential that goes before them, and that potential is their highest realization, which is made in the image of God's sacrifice. And so we want to be able to see this potential in others as actual. And in seeing the potentiality of others as the embodiment of God's sacrifice, we see something about their future, and we then are able to see something about our own futures. And so that's what it means to judge the secrets of men by Christ Jesus, is these kind of lower levels of evolutionary adaptation that can be vindictive and cunning and conniving and brutal. Those secrets are all judged relative to God's self-sacrifice, disintegration, and embodiment in human beings. Okay. So then let's read Matthew. So follow me and I will make you fishers of men. This is Christ talking. Preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every infirmity among the people. Okay. So I think I switched these around. No. Okay. I don't know. I think that's all I wanted to say about all that. Preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease. This is just the image of the sacrifice of God going before human beings as their potential. Okay, so let's go to today. Okay, so Romans for today. Hope that is seen is not hope. We do not know how to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with sighs too deep for words. So this is more of the acting as though the kingdom is already present. And so in interpersonal conflict is not just preparation for some future better state, which is sort of the materialistic way of thinking about it, is you make sacrifices now and you get something later. But always already contained within the conflict is the seed of, but also the consummating sort of fullness of reconciliation in God's self-sacrifice and creating finitude. Okay, so let's read the last part then. Nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, utter in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim upon the housetops. So nothing that is covered will not be revealed. So within conflict, there already exists the reconciliation of the image of God in human beings, which is the image of self-sacrifice for the creation of a good world. And so it may be hidden, but it will be made known, and it already is known. What I tell you in the dark, utter in the light. What you hear whispered, proclaim upon the housetops. So those whispers of reconciliation between two people, which is always already consummated because of their being made in the image of God's self-sacrifice, is known in the dark. It's always already known. And so you don't wait until there's some outer evidence of reconciliation to say or to act as though that reconciliation were true, because it is always already true, because God's creation of the world was a creation in self-sacrifice. And the world is an image of God's self-sacrifice, which is always already complete.